Hey, about a year ago on this channel, I made a tier list for the mech squads in Into the Breach, and a lot of people seem to really like that video, so I want to do the same now, but with the time travelers, or pilots as I'm just going to call them. I wanted to make this now especially because the Advanced Edition DLC for Into the Breach is coming out pretty soon, July 19th, and that adds new pilots with new abilities, so I want to get my thoughts in on the existing pilots before new content comes out. Last thing before jumping into the rankings, we have 4 tiers here: the best pilots, the mid-tier pilots, and the worst pilots, and then also just the one artificial pilot who doesn't have the ability to gain experience and get things like +1 movement, +1 reactor core, +2 health, etc. So he's going to be the only one in this tier. But basically, the way I'm thinking about this is if you have a pilot whose ability you will frequently use, like once per map or more, and it's very helpful, it's going to be going in this tier. For some of the mid pilots, they might have abilities that could come in handy from time to time, but you're not going to be using them super frequently. And for these worst pilots, I'm thinking about them in terms of, like, you almost might not even notice if their ability wasn't there. Like, their abilities are just so negligible that they're going into the worst tier. So with that being said, let's start off with our first pilot, Abe Isamu. I think that pronunciation's correct, but I don't know how any of these guys' names are pronounced, to be honest. So his ability is he has Armored, meaning it reduces all incoming Vec attack damage by 1. I'm going to be putting him into the mid tier. So his ability is not like terrible by any means, but there aren't many situations where it's tremendously helpful in my opinion. Now, if his ability were to, say, reduce all incoming damage by 1, including things like fire damage, bump damage, Vec spawn damage, he would easily be top tier. But you know, a lot of this game doesn't revolve around getting your pilots and your mechs hit so much as it does moving and destroying the enemies, right? I will say though, Abe, if you're using the Brute mech from the Zenith Guard, or the Prime or the Brute mech for the Hazardous mech squad, all 3 of those mechs do self-damage. If he's in those mechs, he's obviously like a top tier pilot, right? For those 3 mechs, any mech that does self-damage, he's easily top tier, because you can essentially use those attacks without incurring any self-damage. But for pretty much all other situations, he's essentially a mid-tier. I would almost even consider putting him in the worst tier if it weren't for the fact that he's top tier in things like the Zenith Guard and Hazardous mechs. So I'm going to say mid-tier for Abe. Okay. Next pilot is Archimedes, and his ability is you can do a full movement after using your action. So if you heal, well, you could move, then if you heal or attack, you can move again your full movement range. It does cost 1 reactor core, but even with that, I'm going to be putting him in best. I honestly think he's one of the best pilots in the entire game. I don't think he's the best, but he's definitely my personal favorite, because my playstyle, when I'm playing Into the Breach, is I love to attack enemies, obviously you have to, but I love to block spawns. So with him, I can go wherever I want, attack an enemy, and then block a Vec spawn. And the thing that's nice is his second movement also scales with his normal movement. So if you get him up to like 5, 6 movement, he gets 5 movement or 6, then can do his action, then 5 or 6 again. He can essentially reach like any spot on the board, and it's really easy for him to block Vec spawns, which is crucial in managing just playing the game in general. So Archimedes, definitely one of the best, absolutely my personal favorite of all the pilots on the list. Next on our list is the first of 3 secret pilots, Ariadne, and the ability there is +3 health and immune to fire. Now, I'm going to put Ariadne into the mid tier right here, and the reason for this is, so the +3 health is useful. It's not tremendously useful, but it is useful. Like I just mentioned, I love blocking Vec spawns, and so the +3 health does give a lot of additional assistance with that. Plus, you don't necessarily need to spend a reactor core to upgrade the health of the mech that Ariadne's in to go +2, because Ariadne does have that +3. Ariadne's second ability, being immune to fire, is, like, in my opinion, almost entirely worthless. Because in general, you don't ever want to be putting your mech in a position where they can get caught on fire unless you're controlling the flame behemoths, but they already come with their own fire resistant skill. So the being immune to fire is, like, in my opinion, almost entirely useless. If her thing were like isn't affected by acid, That would be interesting. I think Ariadne would still be mid if her thing were not affected by acid, but maybe she'd be on this tier for the acid island. Probably still mid, but the acid would just make more sense in my opinion. Next pilot, Bethany Jones, ability, she starts the mission, she starts every mission with a shield. So funny how these first three in the mid tier all have a sort of additional health benefits, right? Armor, +3 health, shield. So the nice thing about the shield, as opposed to say the armor or the +3 health, is it totally nullifies all the damage from the first damage she receives. So if it's an alpha leaper targeting her for 5 damage, it's going to be 0 to her. Whereas for Ariadne, it'd be 5, and Abe, it would be 4. But the real benefit of the shield, in my opinion, isn't that it takes all the damage away from the first damage you would get, but rather it prevents environmental effects from getting to you. So you can't be lit on fire if you're in a shield, you can't be put into acid if you're in a shield, and most importantly, you can't be frozen. And so Bethany Jones synergizes very, very well with the Frozen Titan squad, because if you put her in the ranged mech, she won't get frozen if you fire the shot. For a while, I thought she was best tier when she was with the Frozen Titans. However, there is a mech later on that a lot of you probably already know about, who basically does what Bethany Jones does and better. So for that reason, Bethany Jones is going to be a mid-tier pilot. Okay, next is Camila Vera. Her ability is she is unaffected by webbing and smoke. So if a scorpion or leaper webs her, she can still move, and if she's in smoke, she can still attack. This is easily one of the best pilots in the game. The more options you have in like almost any game, the better your odds are of being successful. And so Camila essentially isn't affected by a lot of potential negative effects that are staples of the game, like smoke, but especially webbing. You don't have to worry about scorpions. In fact, you can even put her toward the beginning of your Vec deployment with the intention of scorpions or leapers targeting her, and then you can just move her out of the way and do whatever you need with her, and the scorpion or leaper will have essentially wasted its turn. So Camila's fantastic, and keep in mind also, this is a free ability. I feel like even if this were 1 reactor core worth, she would still be in the best pilot, because her ability is that good. Okay, so next pilot is Chen Rong, and her ability is that after using an action, she can move 1 tile in any direction. So I'm going to be putting her in the mid tier. I just said with Camila, one of the best things about this game is having options, and Camila's movement does give you that, but she's basically just a worse version of Archimedes. Even though her ability is free and Archimedes is 1 reactor core, would you rather be able to spend 1 extra reactor core on your entire run to do an entire movement again, or for free with 1 tile? Maybe some of you would disagree, but I feel like the 1 tile movement simply isn't enough to justify anything above mid-tier. Sure, you could put her like next to a Vex spawn or next to somewhere where you need to go, but 1 movement is not tremendously helpful in my opinion, especially considering there's a better version of her in the best tier already. Alright, next we have the CorPilot. I actually didn't know there was a name for these default pilots, but CorPilot is a portmanteau of corporate pilot. And so they're going into the worst pilot category, obviously because they don't actually have an ability. The only thing they really have is the ability to gain experience, which every pilot has, right? So they can get, +3 grid defense, plus reactor core, plus movement, +2 health. So they're obviously better than the artificial pilot, because the artificial pilot can't do those things, but they literally don't have an ability, so they're going into the negligible ability section. Next is the Cyborg Pilot. You are given these / forced to use them when you're piloting the Secret Squad, and their ability is that if they die, instead of actually dying, they just lose 25 experience. I am also going to be putting this into the worst pilot / negligible ability tier. The reason for this is because, in general, if you've gotten to the point in the game where you've unlocked the Secret Squad, meaning you've completed all achievements, you've gotten 2, 3, 4 island victories on every squad, you're probably at least decent at not letting your pilots die. And there have been very, very, very few times when I'm playing where one of these 3 actually dies, right? So from that standpoint, it's already pretty negligible. But I feel like in addition to it being kind of negligible, it's actually potentially harmful in my opinion. So let's say, for example, the most recent skill that this cyborg got was like +1 reactor core, right? And you use that reactor core to power a crucial item that you had just purchased at a shop. If this guy dies, and that reactor core was the most recent skill, you lose that reactor core, you lose access to that item or a specific upgrade to that item. And so it could be very easy that while you're playing, you could be in the autopilot mindset of like, oh, I know I can use this weapon and I've got this upgraded for it. But then you set up a turn to use it and you actually try to use it and you're like, oh wait, shit, he lost that most recent ability, I can't use this messes with my strategy. So I think this is definitely worst tier because 1, you don't want your pilots to be dying too much anyway, but 2, I see it as having the ability to actually detrimentally impact your run because you tend to get used to what you have, and this is the only pilot where progress can go backwards. Okay, the next pilot is Gana, and his ability, is it a guy? It looks kind of like a robot to me, I don't know. Its ability is that for the power of 1 reactor core, you can drop him anywhere on the map, and he does 1 damage next to every enemy that he lands next to. I'm going to be putting Gana into the worst pilot tier. The reason for this is I don't really think his ability is that helpful beyond maybe the first few islands on easy or normal. If you're playing on hard or you're just later in the game in general, there are going to be so few enemies with 1 health that I don't think it's going to wind up mattering that much. And you only get to use it for the first turn too. It's not like you have this ability every turn. I will say one interesting application of his ability that's kind of useful is in the setup phase for the final island, the Vec Hive, the game will show you the spots where you can't drop him, and that lets you know where the power pylons are. But even that is kind of just like a cool feature, not a tremendously helpful experience. I think Gana's ability would be interestingly rebalanced if it didn't cost a reactor core and maybe it didn't do damage, so you could start him wherever you want. But the fact that it costs 1 reactor core is just kind of nuts to me for how lackluster this ability is. And honestly, even if his ability were free, I would probably still put him into the worst pilots category instead of the mid pilots because I just personally really never get any use out of him. Alright, next pilot is Harold Schmidt. His ability is that his heal, in addition to healing him, also does a pulse, like a 1-tile push in every direction. I'm going to be putting him into the mid pilots tier. The reason for this is because that push is definitely somewhat helpful, but as the game goes on, you really want to be getting stronger and better weapons. The pulse is good for like a backup option, but if you're on island 3 or 4 on the final and you're just using his push in addition to other stronger things that you should have, that feels like an issue to me, right? Like that's really just a backup in case there's an issue you've run into. I actually have also run into situations where there was like a power pylon, a Vec, and me, and I needed to heal or I would die, but the healing would push the Vec into the power pylon. I think he would be better if you had the option to separate healing from healing and push, but even if you had the ability to separate that, which you don't, I would still say that he's mid-tier at best. Kwan is next, and his ability is he can move through enemy Vec. So I'm going to be putting him into the mid-tier. I think he's a little bit like higher mid-tier, but mid-tier still. And the reason for that is moving through Vec can be very helpful, but there's still a lot of things that he can't really do. Like, even though he can move through Vec, he can't move through buildings or mountains or use an action while over water. And think about the levels too, where there's like a lot of structures in the middle. Kwan is good at moving through enemy Vec, but like he still has to navigate all the way around those big structures to get to the other side, which can take a lot of time. The other thing about him too is that flying mechs just do everything he does but better, and for no cost. Like if a mech is flying by default, it can do an action over water, move through mountains, move through structures. So Kwan is good for grounded mechs, but still not great, because you'd rather a mech have the ability to fly than be able to move through enemy Vec. Okay, next pilot is, oh god, what is this guy's name? Isaac Jones, and his ability is he gives you an extra reset per map. So I'm going to be putting him into the worst pilot's negligible ability tier. And the reason for that is, so he is a beginner-friendly pilot, right? But as you get better at the game and as you spend more time playing it, you really shouldn't need to be using more than 1 reset, if 1 reset at all, on the maps that you play. The way I see him, he's either just like a really beginner-friendly pilot or just a misclick-friendly pilot. once you've gotten to the point where you don't need a reset more than once per level, or 0 times per level, he is essentially entirely useless. Next pilot is Kazaaakpleth, and his ability is that instead of healing, he can do a 2 damage push just like the Prime Mech, and he is definitely going in the best tier, easily one of the best pilots of the game. That 2 damage push is just such a tremendously powerful base attack that it gives you so many fantastic options. Even though it can't be upgraded, that 2 damage push can still do loads of damage. If you push one Vec into another, it can do 3 damage to the one that's being punched and 1 damage to the other. So a 4 damage attack just for the cost of not being able to heal. It doesn't really make sense to place Kazaaakpleth in a Prime Mech, but if you place him in like a Science Mech, that instantly makes it so much more versatile, right? It has all the movement and special sciencey options, but it also has a really strong hitting 2 damage pushing punch. So Kazaaakpleth, easily one of the best in the game, easily best tier. Next pilot is Lily Reed, and her ability is at the start of the turn, you can move 3 additional spaces than you normally can, and then after that it goes back to normal. So she's going to be going into the mid tier, because first turn setup is important, right? Like having all the options available to you in the very beginning is so important to determining the future success of the mission that having that additional 3 movement can be very, very helpful. But after the first turn, she's literally just a normal pilot, so there's no chance that she could be any higher than mid, but I do think the 3 movement in the beginning is tremendously helpful just for setting up and making sure you have everything the way you want it to be. Okay, the next pilot is our last secret pilot, Mafan, and his ability is that he starts the map with a shield and it regenerates every turn, and he also comes with 1 extra reactor core, and the only penalty he takes is that he permanently has 1 health. Mafan is easily top tier. I said before that Archimedes is my favorite pilot in the game, but I think Mafan is unquestionably the best pilot in the game. The fact that he comes with an extra reactor core, that by itself is phenomenal, because the faster you can get reactor cores in the game, the better your weapons, the better your runs are going to be. And on top of starting with an extra reactor core, he has a shield that regenerates every single turn. So that means he can never be frozen, he can never be set on fire, and as long as he doesn't take more than 1 damage in a turn, he's basically invincible. So the penalty of him having only 1 health is like barely a penalty. In my opinion, it would be a lot more interesting if his penalty was like -1 movement rather than having only 1 health, because it's so hard to kill him. You have to be damaged twice in 1 turn. And to be totally honest, the extra reactor core he comes with is such a tremendous boon by itself that even if you took away his regenerating shield, or the shield altogether, I still think Mafan would be a top tier pilot. But considering that he has a shield that regenerates every single turn, and comes with an extra reactor core, he is just without a doubt the best pilot in the entire game. Okay, the next pilot is Prospero, and his ability is that he can make any mech flying for 1 reactor core. Essentially, he is the better version of Henry Kwan, and so he goes into the best pilots category. If you have like a Prime Mech or a Brute Mech that isn't already flying, you smack 1 reactor core in it, and all of a sudden, it can move through enemy Vec just like Henry Kwan can, but it can also use an action while above the water, move through buildings, move through mountains. The more options and more movement flexibility you have in this game, the better you're going to be, and for the price of just 1 reactor core, Prospero allows you to turn any mech into essentially like a transparent ghost that can go wherever it wants and isn't bothered by any terrain or any enemies whatsoever. So Prospero, easily top tier. Next is Ralph Karlsson, who is the guy you get at the very beginning of the game. His ability is for every kill you get, an additional 2 experience is added to him. He's going to be going into the negligible pilot category. And he's pretty similar in my opinion to Isaac Jones, because he's definitely helpful for a beginner, right? He can help you get the level ups like +1 movement, +1 reactor core. He can help you get those more quickly than you otherwise would. But once you reach his maximum level, he literally just becomes a core pilot with no ability whatsoever, right? Just like Lily after the first turn. Once you finish upgrading him, his pilot ability is gone. So yeah, some of those upgrades coming earlier than later might be helpful, but the fact that he turns into an entirely normal pilot after that is why he's bottom tier in my opinion. And last, but definitely not least, is Silica, whose ability is for 2 reactor cores. He can use an action twice per turn as long as he doesn't move, and this easily brings him into the top tier category. His ability is just so powerful because he is the only character in the game who can literally attack twice on 1 turn. Yes, you can't move, but that's a small price to pay for being able to attack twice. Ideally, you want him to have something ranged so he can hit the same enemy twice, or maybe 1 enemy in this line of sight and then 1 enemy in this line of sight. But definitely the most busted combination with Silica is the wind turbines weapon, where you can move every movable object 1 space in any direction on the map. And because you don't have to be actually touching an enemy vec to use it, you can use that from wherever you are on the map. So Silica can essentially make that happen twice. Another thing about Silica I didn't mention that makes him top tier for sure is you don't have to use the actions back to back, and they don't even have to be the same action, right? You could heal and then attack, or you could choose to attack, let your other mechs move, then attack again with him, and you don't have to use the same 2 weapons when you're attacking either, as long as you don't move. So even though Silica requires 2 reactor cores to activate his ability, it is easily a top tier ability. Alright, well we've gone over all the pilots here. It's pretty interesting how this worked out. 6 top tier, 7 mid tier, 5 terrible tier, and then the artificial pilot, who I guess is technically the worst, but you know, that's not his fault. It's just, that's the way he is. I like how balanced it wound up being, and I'm very excited to see what the new pilot's abilities are going to be and how I will wind up rating them on this list, because I will definitely do another tier list once the new Advanced Edition comes out and I have some time to experiment and play with the new pilots and their abilities. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you want to see more Into the Breach content, subscribe and also join the Discord. Both are linked in the description. Thanks, and I'll see you later.